So what are some of the overarching concerns that you have with this pending ACP-EU agreement?
Well, you know, this document, it's so long and it's so kind of complex that it's been kind of difficult to pinpoint some of the overarching concerns. But guess what? I was thinking about it and decided that maybe we could put it in two categories: threats to our national sovereignty and the targeting of our children.
Yeah.
In terms of threats to our national sovereignty, we're talking about things like the fact that they're forcing us to vote along with them, right? So they're actually mobilizing 79 countries, African, Caribbean, and Pacific, in order to go along with any vote that they decide at the United Nations. So they're creating this huge voting bloc, and we don't have a say. We won't have a say if we sign this document come next year, well, January 2023. So that would be one thing. So it's the forced voting and that power grab that the EU is trying to accomplish. Then under threats to national sovereignty, I would also put the LGBT agenda and abortion, because those are areas that we have completely different perspectives on. That is the Caribbean versus the EU, and they kind of just don't care, and they're kind of dictating to us what we should do with our people. The second thing that I would say, the second general category would be the targeting of our children, because this document speaks very strongly in an affirmation of comprehensive sexuality education and also the removal of parental rights. Now, that's crazy. That's very, very concerning. So we're going to talk about that and look into that, because those are some of the areas that are extremely, extremely concerning. Now, there are others, but we're trying to break it down and simplify it, and I think those two areas would really cover it.
Right. I know it's interesting. The EU had put out a briefing paper in January 2021 about the negotiations, and they had said, this is from the EU now, they had said that one of the sticking points in the negotiations, why it had delayed to that point. Originally, it should have been concluded by February 2020, but various delays as well as COVID pushed it back. And in January 2021, they're writing now that one of the sticking points was the topic of sexual and reproductive health and rights, which we know the EU interprets as meaning abortion, contraception for minors, removing the parental rights. And here's the thing. The EU Parliament had expressly instructed their negotiators that the chapter on human rights must list the forms of discrimination that should be combated: sexual, ethnic, and religious discrimination, and mention sexual and reproductive rights. So we weren't there in the negotiating room, but from this statement from the EU, clearly there was some resistance from the ACP countries. But here, the Parliament is instructing the negotiators, you must push through on human rights. You must push through on sexual and reproductive rights. You must push through, in other words, on abortion, LGBT, and those sort of issues.
Even from before that, you know, in February 2015, the European Parliament decided that the ACP countries were been going too slowly as it relates to homosexuality and moving towards same-sex marriage and gay adoption and the whole transgender fad that's taking over Europe currently. They decided that we're going too slowly. So they wanted, when they're crafting this document, to put in this concept of non-negotiable human rights. That itself is a threat to national sovereignty. How can it be non-negotiable human rights? Who determines what should be non-negotiable human rights? And so there's actually a lot of pushback happening in Europe, but the leaders themselves have decided that they want to pull Europe that direction, and they actually want to pull the whole world. Our 79 ACP countries, they want to push us in that direction, and they don't want us to have a say. That's crazy.
It is. And adding to that threat to national sovereignty is a particular provision in the agreement, Article 101 in the General Pact. You're aware of this? It has to do with dispute settlement mechanisms. Now, it is the normal practice in binding international trade agreements that you'll have some sort of dispute settlement mechanism to deal with challenges that arise. And the normal process is to have several stages to resolve the issue. You'd have consultations, maybe you might appeal to a particular committee that you'll set up, maybe there'll be an appeals tribunal, and then the ultimate, the extreme is sanctions, withdrawing the access that you have granted to each other in that trade agreement. In the ACP-EU agreement, you know what has happened? They have set out the normal process, 60, 90 days, what have you, but for human rights and for non-proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. If one party deems the other to be in infringement, they could jump over that normal process and go straight to where? Trade sanctions. Why?
Just thinking about that, that's crazy. They have actually put their ideas around human rights. They've put it on the same level as the non-proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. It's almost like they're saying, if you disagree with us, it is like blowing up a nuclear bomb or securing something that could destroy the nation, the world. You know, their ideas, especially as seen in Article 101, are just completely crazy. They're out of proportion. What they have effectually said is that they're so smart and they care so much about the world that if anyone disagrees with them in terms of their definition of human rights, and that would cover everything, same-sex marriage, gender transitions, comprehensive sexuality education, abortion, if persons disagree with them, it's almost like deciding that you're going to go rogue like North Korea. Come on, what is going on in this document?
So let's imagine a scenario. We know that the EU is strongly in favor of the murder of unborn babies. How would the government of Jamaica respond if the EU unilaterally decides that Jamaica's preservation of the life of the unborn is a human rights violation against some women, and then they institute trade sanction against Jamaica's exports? That's an imagined scenario, but it is not far-fetched because there is in the EU Parliament a resolution, they call it the Matic resolution. It's not binding, but at least it shows us some thinking. And in that resolution, the European Parliament agreed that not providing abortion for women is a human rights violation. And if a doctor chooses not to carry out abortion, they could be sanctioned, they could be punished if they object on grounds of conscience and religion. So it's not a far-fetched example. What would the government of Jamaica do should the EU raise this as a ground to exact trade sanctions against Jamaica?
Exactly. And again, this is binding for 20 years. So we really have to be careful about the kinds of documents that we're signing.